with Torrie. Hey, boy, has it been an interesting couple of weeks. I've delayed actually doing the next episode as such of Life Over Coffee, mainly because things keep on changing. They have definitely kept on changing. And like me and with so many others, we notice things, consequently. See, I've had something on my eye and various parts of my body, which I'm aching about, I can tell you, are notice things, ignore things, sort of people tell you about things, and then you've got no other thought of actually having to deal with things. So I'll put my glasses on, you won't notice it so much. So our current economy is pretty much the same thing. As of March, so we're talking now 5 months: March, April, May, June, July. And this is about 22nd, 23rd of July. And hopefully I'll get this out fairly shortly. We've had a number of things happening. It all started with the Strait of Hormuz. Did you know where Hormuz was until all of this started? Did you have any idea where Hormuz was? Did you know that so much of our tankers for our raw products or supply issues or whatever came through Hormuz? I tell you what, I didn't. And then we had Hormuz with the issue. I'll say America at this point. How can we put it all down to just one man? I think a lot of us can, but anyway, as a governing body, they made a decision to take action on Iran, and that action has actually turned it into a global issue. And of course, it started with fuel. Now, the world, global, whatever, really had a decision that they should actually have 90 days worth of surplus on hand should there be any supply issue disruption. And Australia didn't do that. We had 30 days. And of course, when the supply issues happened, there was a lot of fast talking. And in that first month in March, prices started jumping left, right, and centre. Then the government put in that we will cut some excise so that will reduce the costs. And the fuel costs did come down. But I had actually said, I'm planning for July. So I started noticing things in the supermarket. Things were being a bit here and there. What was on sale? Why was it on sale? Not normally on sale. Is it a base product? Not really. So I started doing, not prepping. Now, prepping is where you are doing emergency type. It's not hoarding. It's when you're actually having an excessive amount of stock on hand for an extended duration of time. What I've been doing is what's referred to as deep pantry, which means I've not been a big pantry person because I've never believed in having too much dollar value stock on hand because the supermarket's up the road and I can get what I want when I need it, generally. So been doing deep pantry, and since March, I have increased my budget for purchasing my groceries and whatever goes with it by, I think, 25%, and slowly been getting a stock of additional items: flour, oat flour, alternative flours, sugar, salt, which is, all sort of basic stuff, tin goods, pasta, anyway, all that sort of stuff. I did purchase a small freezer and started buying some meats and things like that. It's just going to be a bit of a buffer. In reality, I probably could get away with not having to go to the supermarket for much, unless it's fresh stuff, maybe for 3 months, not 12 months. And we'll get into the list of things. So let's go through our list. Fuel that's coming through, fuel supply, disrupted fuel supply. I think that's what they're referring to it as now. So we've got that because of Hormuz. we have got the disruption of supply of fertiliser, nitrogen, nitrogen being the main one, and there's a couple of others. I can't even think what they are. Potassium, whatever. Raw urea, all of that stuff for fertiliser. The problem is with fertilisers is that yes, you may get that tomorrow, but today the farmers need to actually put it in the ground. There are certain set periods when fertilisers get added to plant material, and that to either maintain or increase yields or have a good yield. And this is why the fertiliser timing is really, really important. Now, when it actually happened, a portion of farmers already had their fertiliser supply for winter harvesting, especially of the winter wheat. But worldwide wheat production in general has gone down. America has gone down something like, I don't know, 28-30% in their actual wheat harvest for their current summer season. And some of that is not necessarily because plus they've had extreme drought during their wheat growing belts through America, different states. And we've had our wheat harvest hasn't come in quite just yet, but they were already expecting a reduction. I think ours was a reduction of 13% or something. It sounds minimal, but it can be massive. But the only problem is that a lot of our farmers are having to make a decision: do we plant? Do we go through the expense of planting when there's a fuel issue, as in diesel? Diesel is in everything that has a production type of event, and a lot of that is with farming or hauling materials and that, or goods, and that diesel is actually used. So then there's the fertiliser issue. They're already stating in the eastern states that farmers are looking at next season, which is our spring summer season, of having a deficit of approximately $16,000 per farmer minimum. And can they afford that? What can they do to offset some of that expense? They can't carry that debt. That debt's there and they have to try to manage it, and their profit margins weren't that significant. And that's before they actually have started to plant. That's what they're estimating. So farmers are going, reduced yield, not enough fertiliser, reduced yield, climatic issues, reduced yield, transporting issues. It does end up adding up. Then there's the economy in general. So with fuel issues, production issues, transport issues, that will affect the economy, not just the bottom line for food in our tummies. It will actually affect production, and that in turn affects tax return, which in turn means the government has to try to work out where else can they get their money from. Governments are not geared up to have their own independent revenue. They rely on small business and compare. And I was actually watching something today that was saying, in the 90s or something, there was 28% of our tax came from small business. Now there's only 7% that's going in tax from small business into the coffers. Where does the government get the extra money? Because they have got additional, responsibility. And yeah, we're an ageing population and we all want our pensions. Or do we get our pensions? Interesting by note. So in turn, to reduce any what looks like excessive spending, because the Reserve Bank actually looks at the dollar value and not the reason why we're spending extra dollars, but we're actually not, because the increase in our cost of living has actually gone up, and this is why we're spending more. But they don't look at that. They look at the actual dollar, how much dollars are being done. So let's put up the interest rate to slow down spending. Doesn't quite work that way when you're actually looking at your budget as such. So economy is a bit of an issue. And then we have weather. El Nino. El Nino being expected this year, the last big. We've had 5 El Ninos through our recorded history, which started in about 1915, around then. Recorded history, there's been 5. The last major one, which is like what this one's going to be, happened 75 years ago. Okay, 75 years, take that back, that sort of sticks us into the 50s or late 40s after the war. But the one that actually happened before that was at the beginning of recorded history, recorded weather history, which was in, let's say, in the 20s, where we all know what the 20s were. That was the Depression, recession, and the drought and stuff. So that was the Dust Bowl, Dust Bowl through America, Dust Bowl through Australia. And when you put those 3 words together, is not much fun. And the 4th word being El Nino. Now, El Nino is going to be interesting because the reality of the El Nino effect is because of 2 things. 2 things which have become an issue. Now, each one of these topics on their own are is it a crisis, or it's just elevated urgency? On their own, independently, each country, because this is now not just a national issue, this is a global issue. Each one of those things can, if there's only one, we will try to get supplies from elsewhere, or we'll sort of shift focus of how we'll actually manage them. Because, 70s, that's when we got the interest rates of 17%. But all of them all together, that's where it becomes a global crisis. Now, El Nino in itself is pretty much the increase of water temperature, and it's gone up by 1.43% across the Pacific Ocean, and it is a margin that's through the equator, so it's a little bit up from the equator, a little bit down from the equator, which affects Australia. Up from the equator will actually affect a lot of the Asian belt. And there it's going to be, and it comes from east to west. So if you're a country that has that from east to west weather pattern, then that's going to be our difficulty. So how do we really look at it? So there's a number of factors in produce that is going to be affected by that. Rice. Okay. Rice is mainly, we do have it in Australia, and that we do have our grains, but we don't produce enough of the grains to actually supply us nationally on its own. So we have to rely on imports for rice for our population. It is grown through the Asian belt, so that is sort of, China, Indonesia, Malaysia, and then all the way over to India. India in itself produces 60% of the world rice. India's population, it's quite large, but their political governing streams have actually they have now reduced their sugar and their rice exports, and leaving the bulk of what is actually being produced, especially under this El Nino and global issues, for domestic supply. They've actually stopped exporting a lot, which will affect rice on the shelf if you buy overseas rices. Indonesia relies on the rainfall to grow rice, and they don't do a drought-restricted rice growing grain. So again, where do you get your rice from? I think this is probably the bottom line of that. The other thing is sugar. Now, sugar is sort of grown. We grow it in Queensland, and there is some of it's done through other belts, but the other main producer of sugar is over in Brazil. Brazil is interesting. What's actually happened with their sugar is the fact is that during this fuel crisis, because they're a big biofuel consumer, they have upped their usage of their sugarcane. Now, I always thought sugarcane biofuel was a byproduct. I never realised it's actually a crop that is harvested prior to maturity to produce their fuel. And during this fuel crisis, that's what they used. Consequently, there's going to be a sugar, what is the word? A sugar issue, sugar supply issue worldwide, going to be an issue. Then you've got the other thing. We have got the coffee. Now, we're not a big coffee producers. We don't produce enough coffee in Australia here for our just domestic consumption. And that China and Brazil are the two biggest coffee producers. So with that, our China is going to be affected with the growing of their coffee, and that their coffee, which is robust strain, is what is used for the instant coffee. So El Nino is going to affect that. But on the good note, the Brazilian coffee that's actually produced, that's actually mainly used for all the percolated coffees, the drip system sort of coffee. But then if you add that fertilizer, fuel, it's going to go up regardless. And the other one is chocolate. Chocolate is mainly done in Africa and Brazil, but it's been drastically affected by a strain of disease and drought, and this is one of the reasons why the cocoa has gone up in price dramatically, and then put on top of that the fuel to get it to us. Okay, so it's going to go up. Next thing after that is that's going to be affected is, what is it? Palm oil. Palm oil is actually in everything. It's in makeup, it's in food production, it's in a lot of things. And that is in the line of fire of that El Nino weather pattern. And that, so there will be a reduction of yield with that as well. So I just sort of thought, okay, let me just making sure that I've cut, and also when you're looking at oils as well, which is through, well, Europe's had their issues. They're a big producer of a lot of our oils, and that, especially the olive oil. It's only because Australia, I think we put ourselves in a position. Australia used to be considered the lucky country. And part of that luck was the fact is that we were very self-sufficient in a lot of things. We were very, very self-sufficient. But economy has placed us years ago, and I think it actually started more in the late 70s when people or manufacturers, stakeholders decided to go offshore. And we know in Australia that we slowly lost a lot of our ability to self-maintain, self-produce a lot of items, and we relied on the cheaper, manpower production, so that the stakeholders will get bigger share returns, whatever. So we lost a lot of that. And part of that is, do you know that there's two things that surprised me? One was Australia has no canning industry, like as in making cans. We don't make our own cans because we don't utilise our own tin that we had. We actually get not the raw product, but the produced product. We get that from overseas, and then it comes and goes to wherever. We don't have that many canneries in Australia. We used to have so many, but we don't. A lot of it is actually done overseas. So canning products, which include, your fruit and your vegetables, your fish, which most people would actually fall with what they buy in those three categories. Ingle is not an Australian thing. John West is not an Australian thing. We lost a lot of that. Our reliance on overseas has gone from minor to major. Yeah, that becomes an issue. So that was one thing. Tin is an issue. The other thing that surprised me is that I never thought about it. Honestly, I never thought about it. I'd get out my Glad bag and that, or my Glad wrap, or any of the plastic, Gladdy, plasticky, storagey things that I use, in a big way, because I put it in the freezer. Mainly I'd use it as a freezing item. It comes from China. I never knew that. I never knew that Glad was actually a Chinese company. Not that how coming it from China isn't actually an issue. It's the fact is that we need to import it, import it for our domestic use. I mean, it's like our timber treatment. You get the timber that it gets, dipped in that stuff so it doesn't rot. Can't even think what the freaking thing is called actually now. But we cut the timber here in Australia and we export it to China and it gets dipped and processed and whatever and then gets shipped back. Which is what they end up finding that during COVID, when there was a building supply issue, is because it was coming, not the fact we didn't have it, is the fact is that it was in China and we didn't have it here. When did we stop doing that here in Australia? When did it stop being a priority? Who knows? Who knows? I don't know. I really don't know. So there's a lot of things actually happening on multi levels, but because it's happening all at the same time, this is the issue. It's all happening at the same time. So that's why that supply shock type production shock is a global issue, because it's all happening at the same time. So there's probably a number of things, households, have a look and see, where does your product come from? I said in one of my other video stories to have a look at, what's on sale and why is it on sale, and then, sort of buy up when you can. And I've noticed that my local supermarket has suddenly done a reshift of a lot of items. And part of it is supply issue. Part of it is who's going to get the bigger marketing share. Do you know supermarkets used to only have a very, very small proportion of their own brand, be Coles or Home Brand or whatever. It was only a small proportion of the shelf. Now it's major, the majority of our shelves. Brands as such, not that many brands, and there's going to be even sort of less. So know where your items come from, and that. Have a look at being self-sufficient is going to be really hard. We're not geared up for that. A lot of people aren't geared up for that. We've been in winter, we're now going into sort of spring, summer. Northern states should be already doing, if you're going to be a home gardener, now's the time to do it. Start prepping a space, start getting your supplies, and then knowing where you're going to get your seedlings or seeds or whatever, just to do a buffer. I mean, my pantry's technically only a buffer. So if something's gone up dramatically, I know what I can actually buff with. Knowing that farmers are going to be making hard decisions in the future, and that they can see what they're going to do a couple of seasons ahead with what they can actually get, and they do that now. So they were talking about spring, summer 5 months ago. and that's it's almost what we should be doing as well. Can you get the our food to stretch is going to become really important. Have you developed some new skills? Go and develop. I'm sausage making. Is it cheaper? Um, I think it's about 50-50. The better I'm getting, the more cheaper it's becoming. Apparently, it's really damn yummy. Doing really well. I even had a session with my grandson, teaching him, and we did a session of making sausages. I bought a really cheap machine, and that to grind my mince, and then found out where I can get my casings from and whatever. And it's been a little interesting exercise. But I'm also learning how to make more gluten-free items instead of actually purchasing them. There's been lots of things using alternative flours. I made my first lot of marmalade because oranges are in season. So I've sort of done that. I only use 2 or 3 jars a year, but I've got them and I've given some away, and now I know that that was my first lot of jam preserving, and I will now go into making other jams for our personal use or for friends and family. But my big thing is that I want to do tomatoes. I want to make my own tomato sauce, and that because we do have pasta, and and you use tomatoes as a base for a lot of things. So I've been buying jars, preserving jars. Preserving jars have either been very, very expensive or been hard to get. America has got a short fall in getting the lids. If you're into Mason and you buy the new lids every year, they're getting tougher and tougher to actually get. I tried to get some jam setter, and that no supermarket anywhere actually had it. I had to actually buy it online. I wasn't prepared to wait for it to come in season because there's no guarantee it's going to be there. And there's a couple of different methods of having the peptine and how you do your peptine. So I got some for just in case and stuff. So I've done that, which has been great. Made my own chili sauce, which turned out to be a hit. Found a recipe that worked. Everybody loves it. And so I'll preserve some of that. So what sort of skills can you find that you can do? Have you sort of talked to your neighbours and go, hey, if I grow this year, if you grow that and that, let's split the harvest. I've already talked to a girlfriend about going to some suppliers that when I'm not going to grow enough tomatoes to make I've worked out I need between 30 and 40 jars, not big jars, but jars, um, to get me through for the year, and I'll be able to give some to my daughter as well. But we'll need volumes of tomatoes to do that. So I've got all my jars. That's took a little bit of sourcing. Some I weren't happy with. That's why I did some testing with jam. Weren't happy with the brand and the seal and stuff like that. And these other ones I am. But yeah, that surprised me. The difficulty in getting jars for the volume, for that 30 whatever that I actually want. And them saying they don't know when they're going to get the next lot in. So I'm already starting to prep for summer. And there's probably a whole heap of others, I've been really taking in information on a lot of levels. But the bottom line of it all is that things are going to change and things are going to get worse. And if I am going to predict July is just the beginning, the next impact will be around October. It will happen again. So if we are reliant on the fact that the government will fix the system and that, he's just doing what he can do because he doesn't know what the top person's doing who's actually manipulating. I mean, what are they talking about? They're talking about bombs. That in America will bomb this or do that. The issue with in America, not America, in Iran and the Strait, and unrest, travel warnings. I I would look at the world right now in a couple of different ways. One is save your dollars, save where you can. Why do you need three streams? I've been taking a lot of things at a lot of different levels, but I've also looked at a couple of other things which are probably a lot more basic, and I think that it probably would be an interesting exercise even for your own home home budget, looking at the facts down the hill. One part of that is where is your budget stretching to and what can you do to assist it? And look, it's not a we have to manage it week by week, but we're going to have to look at this because if this is not just going to be this month, next month, the repercussions in shortfall of product for food is not going to, some of it will happen fast and some of it will happen slow. So we will have some stuff that will happen within the next 3 months, but some of these bigger things may take 9 months to come through. So you sort of have a bit of a window if you see a product like the rice that I buy at one store is $30 a bag now. That's what it's gone up to. But at another store, I noticed that they didn't have it on sale, but it was actually $16 a bag. So I've bought a couple of bags, I think they're 5 kilo bags or whatever. So then, but when they come in and they end up coming through the shelves again, most likely they will be $30 a bag. So it's sort of knowing your prices, knowing what you're doing, what can you go without, what's worthwhile storing, can I store it safely, and how is it going to be in like 6-9 months' time? Do I have a little bit of a window? Yes and no, depending, as I said, things have been changing every few days. But with the additional part of it, is it that what can I do? And we will have a few months where before your next utility bill where you'll see a spike. I've got my council rates. I was so surprised. It's only gone up 4.3%. I was surprised because usually it goes up 8%. But they made it very, very clear that they have tried to reduce all of their expenditure just for maintenance. They're not doing very many new projects or whatever because of the cost. So how do we do that? Have you got streaming? Do you have 3 streaming services? Cut it down to one. Use that and then go, right, I'm bored with it. Cut that off. Then if you want to, try to go without it for a month and then source another one. Or go, I'm going to cut it off now and I'm going to use my streaming service during the summer, when I'm hot and I've got to be indoors and at least, you'll have something else. Utility costs. How are you going to offset your summer bill on that? What is it? Years ago, I made it that when I really, really analysed my bill, I made it that for 2 hours a day, I needed to have no additional electrical usage for 2 hours a day for during the week. That will offset me over the weekend, and that worked pretty well. That actually did work pretty well. Water costs, shorten showers. Pretend you're like in drought to a degree. I have this theory. If there's steam in the bathroom, you've been in there too long. That's how I work. I have short showers. Food, how do you make it that you do one vegan meal a week? I know a family who do not eat meat during the week, and they save their meat eating and that for the weekend, and that so during the week it's really, really simple sort of stuff. Maybe not less complex in making, but that's how they actually manage. There's a couple of, to really finalize. It's time for us to pull up our big girl pants and start thinking about how we're going to save. And this is not about short-term saving. This is about, we've got, 5 months till Christmas. How are you going to budget for that? What are you doing for that? What resources are you going to actually use? And stick to the budget. If you're going to be putting some resources aside for Christmas, then start it now. Start those resources, but try to stick to a budget. Maybe do one of those Kris Kringles with your family instead of buying a lot of individual presents if your family is big enough to do that. And then going, right, that's $100. You can buy a decent present with $100. If you're going to be supplying a meal, that Christmas lunch or whatever, who it's definitely sharing the load that it's going to do. If you're one that goes out you actually go out a lot for meals, think about it. I got surprised. I went out for a birthday, and that he paid, which was lovely, but the bill came to $90. Like, I was expecting sort of like 60, 70-ish. Nothing elaborate. It wasn't anything elaborate. I had an entree serving of a meal, which brought it down to $30. He had pizza. There was no alcohol. There was a bottle of bubbled water and lemonade, a glass of lemonade. And that came, and a bowl of chips. I gave him $90. It'd gone up $10 a meal. There are realities on that. They're expecting coffee will be around $12 by the new year. Don't be surprised on that for a cup of coffee. Going out for a meal now, made mention to someone, it's a very big expense for somebody else to do the dishes. I always try to order something that I don't actually cook for myself. No point in me. I don't know why he always orders pizza. I have no idea. But, reevaluate. What is it that's important? Why you do it? Where you do it? There's probably a lot of areas. Going to the shops. I don't go to the shops unless I need 3 things. And it's not 3 items. Need to go in 3 places in my little shopping complex. If I've got to go to Bunnings, I have to be able to needing 3 items. And that stops me from doing those random in the car things, which is so easy to do. It is so easy. Oh, just snip up the shop and go and get some milk. We'll run out. All right. We got 3 things. I need 3 things. There's a lot of a different evaluation. If you have a family, it's really hard because you've got to take into the concept of everyone else's sort of needs. But I don't think we can do this randomly anymore. Look, these are just my thoughts. Look, when I post again, it most likely will be on something practical. I think I might go out in the garden. I haven't showed you my garden. Well, it's not a lot, but, there's bits and pieces out there. But this is a time for action. Don't wait until it's a need. And that, consequently, the eye and the shoulder and the back and the ear, it was all over. A lot of needles, very painful. Don't wait till you have to go through pain to get to that end result. Try to think a little bit ahead, and this is the time to actually do it. Life over coffee, like, subscribe, comment, whatever you do, and I'll see you next time. Bye.